My name's Jonathan Manson, and I'm one of the principal cellos of the orchestra. So my job in the St John Passion is to be part of the continuo group. So I'm playing with the organ and sometimes with the other bass instruments during all the recitatives, and of course during the choruses and arias as well. So it is pretty much continuous, as the name suggests. In this situation, we're often quite a long way away from the singers, and they're often engaged in the dialogue and the action of telling the story. So sometimes, of course, things change every time you do them. The timing might change a little bit, the way somebody pronounces a word might change, and you have to be ready for all those little nuances of the text, especially in the recitatives where things can change very quickly. It really helps to know the piece quite well, of course, to understand the rhythm of the language and to have had plenty of practice at it, just so that you can anticipate some of those little moments that might come up. But it's very much teamwork. Both Stephen and I have to listen to everything and then try and make a decision together without really being able to see each other very well. So there's a lot of brain waves travelling back and forth.
Es war aber an der Stätte, da gekreuziget ward, ein Garten, und im Garten
Bach's recits are absolutely extraordinary. There's no part of them which hasn't been considered carefully, and the continuo writing is miraculous in that sense, that just by the way you play a note you can give a slightly different emphasis or guide the singer or accompany them in a slightly different way. And I find it fascinating, even after playing the piece for many years, how just a small difference of attack or stress or length in those notes can actually affect the flow of the action around you. At one point he actually writes rather programmatically to imitate the sound of the cock crowing, but that's a rare indulgence for Bach to actually to spell out the message quite so clearly. Most of the time it's found in the text rather than in the continuo part. Of course we're trying to be sensitive to every nuance of the singers, but it's not just an accompanimental role. I think it's both are responding to each other in all sorts of ways. So we're neither following nor leading. It's a much more collaborative relationship. I am playing the gamba because I happen to be a gamba player. In Bach's performances, it wouldn't necessarily have been the cellist that played the gamba. In fact, I think in one version it's written in the flute part. So people were much more versatile in those days. They often played many different instruments. But it happens to be one of my passions. And the gamba has a very different tone colour from the cello. I'll just pick up the instrument. It's a very different construction for a start. It has a much more lightweight body and a flat back, and as you can see, many more strings. This is a 7-string gamba. Most viols have 6 strings, but they're all tuned rather similarly. They're tuned in fourths, so with a third in the middle. And this particular instrument had a long and illustrious history from the middle of the 16th century right until the middle of the 18th century. Roughly the time when Bach was writing for the instrument was about the same time that the instrument was starting to go out of fashion. And it already had a slightly archaic feel, I think, for Bach's listeners. And he uses it in very particular moments in both of the great passions that have survived, the St. Matthew and the St. John Passion. He writes obligato solos for the instrument. And in the St. John Passion, it comes just at the moment before Jesus dies on the cross, just after he's said his last words, "It is accomplished, es ist vollbracht." And that becomes the theme of the aria that follows, which is played by the gamba. I think he uses the instrument partly because it has this slightly otherworldly sort of colour. It sounds so different from all the other stringed instruments that you hear in the Passions. And because it's got these frets, which are actually just strings tied very tightly to the fingerboard, it means that every note has the quality of an open string. because it's actually the hard surface of the gut rather than my finger which is really stopping the string. So it has a certain kind of sweetness, a sort of warm transparency, if you like, which is very striking, I think, and it immediately draws the listener into this very intimate sound world. It's a very small setting in the continuo, and just a moment of perfect stillness at that a very dramatic point in the story. And of course, it also has other associations, I think, for Bach's listeners, because it was an instrument that he used in his funeral cantatas, and like other German composers of the time, it was associated with death, because it's one of the quieter instruments like the recorder, the flute, the lute, all these instruments that seem to lead your mind towards heavenly realms somehow. And possibly there's another association there, which is a little bit more hidden in this particular aria. It's more obvious in the St. Matthew Passion aria, but it alludes to royalty, because this was an instrument that attained its zenith in the court of Louis XIV, the great Sun King in France, which was a tremendously influential court. Even in Bach's lifetime, people were still harking back to those great French composers, and they wrote in a very particular style, which often involves a lot of dotted figures. A great deal of the sort of pomp and magnificence of the French court is contained in the writing for the Viola da Gamba. And I think Bach is also alluding somehow to the idea of a heavenly king rather than the earthly king of Louis XIV. So it's a slightly more complicated allusion, but you can hear it in the way that he writes the dotted figures and these sighing appoggiaturas that are so characteristic. And actually, while I was playing that, suddenly everything becomes a little bit quieter around you, and that's often what happens in the Passion as well. Because it's quite a quiet instrument, people listen in a slightly different way. So perhaps that was a good live demonstration of what Bach was trying to achieve.